To our wonderful viewers at Cheating Hour, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. If you like stories like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next exciting story. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know now in the comments. And if you've ever been through something like this, share your experience in the comments. Evan Rourke straightened his tie with quiet precision, fingers moving with the sort of mechanical calm that had defined his life for the past 20 years. A structural engineer by trade and by temperament, Evan was the kind of man who built bridges not just with steel, but with steady hands, careful planning, and the kind of patience that made him seem both distant and dependable. At 43, he had earned a reputation in Chicago's private contracting sector as the one you called when something vital had to hold: foundation cracks, subsidence issues, emergency reinforcements after a storm. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. And when he signed off on a project, nobody questioned it. His home, tucked into an upscale neighborhood just beyond the rush of downtown, reflected the same sense of control. A two-story colonial with a wraparound porch, blue-gray shutters, and a kitchen she'd insisted on redesigning 3 times in the past decade. It wasn't flashy, but it was beautiful, clean, balanced, like everything Evan had put his name on. And until very recently, his name had been on it. He stood in the driveway that Saturday morning with a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, watching the neighborhood ease into the day. Joggers, sprinklers, a neighbor washing his car down the street. Peaceful, rhythmic normalcy. Inside the house, he heard the faint notes of a streaming playlist, something acoustic and vaguely cheerful. It was her morning music, calming, curated, always just right. Clara had a gift for those details. She'd been radiant when he met her at a university donor event back in '09. She wasn't like the other corporate-attached wives flitting between conversations and wine. She was smart, incisive, and had this smile like she could see right through the surface of things. She'd been doing nonprofit housing advocacy right out of grad school and had challenged Evan, kindly but firmly, on the politics of zoning at their first real conversation. He remembered walking away both irritated and enchanted. She was sharp in a way that made him recalibrate. Their courtship had been quick. 6 months of long dinners, train rides, and shared articles emailed late at night. She challenged him, and he grounded her. They weren't perfect, but they fit. She moved into his place first, then they chose the house together the following year. Evan had overseen every inch of the renovation. Clara picked the colors, the cabinetry, the window treatments. He made sure the framing was solid, the drainage impeccable. They were a team. People envied how easy they seemed. And for a long time, it was easy. Even through the hard years, her miscarriage in 2013, his 12-hour days during the downtown overpass crisis, they circled back to each other. Quiet dinners, shared coffee, movie nights with takeout, vacations once a year, usually to the same Vermont lodge she loved. He wasn't demonstrative, not like the men in the books she read, but he was present, consistent. She once told him she felt safest when he walked in the room, but lately that room felt colder. She was busy more often. Late meetings, board dinners, things that hadn't been regular before were now constants. She was always dressed sharply, always scrolling something on her phone, and she'd become more clipped in conversation, more polished, like everything had become a kind of performance. He noticed the small things first, the new jewelry, delicate, expensive, not her usual. A key fob for a car he didn't recognize on the kitchen counter. A canceled weekend trip for her cousin's wedding. That one confused him. Clara adored her cousin, was always texting her. But when he asked about it, she'd waved it off. It's complicated. Family stuff. Then she changed the subject. He started sleeping in his home office more. It was subtle at first. He'd fall asleep working late. Then it became routine. She never asked why, just let it happen. On a Wednesday evening, Evan came home from a site inspection to find a man's leather jacket draped over the back of one of their dining room chairs. It wasn't his. The smell of cologne still lingered. She'd been meeting an investor that day, she'd told him. The tension in his chest that night felt like rebar cracking under a slow, invisible load. But still, no accusations, no fights. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. Evan simply watched, took notes. When they filed their taxes that spring, she volunteered to handle everything. "I have a good guy now," she said. "We'll save more this year," he agreed, calmly. A few weeks later, while reviewing old emails in preparation for a separate audit, Evan found a notification he didn't recognize, a change in the title of the house. He stared at it for a long time, heart a dull thud in his chest, before opening the attached documents. There it was, in stark legal formatting. The house had been refinanced and retitled. His name was gone. The new deed listed Clara Rourke, and only Clara Rourke, as the legal owner of the property they had both chosen, rebuilt, and built their life within. His first response was not rage. It was something quieter, a breath leaving the body, a dissociation of sorts. He called the law office listed in the document, posed as a client, asked about the title work, the process, the authorization. The paralegal walked him through it politely, not knowing she was giving him everything he needed. Clara had forged his authorization using an older scanned signature, not even a particularly good one. He hung up, sat still in the dark office. The coffee he had poured hours ago had gone ice cold. For a full day, he said nothing. He went about work, met a project team in Schaumburg, made notes on a new retaining wall. He smiled at the crew lead, answered emails, ate a turkey sandwich in his car while rereading the title transfer papers like they were something clinical. Which, in a way, they were. He didn't confront her that night. He didn't even ask where she'd been, though she came home late again, this time with tousled hair and that same musky cologne lingering around her jacket. Instead, he picked up his tablet and opened a blank spreadsheet, started a column. Necessary documents. Another. Steps. He knew how to dismantle things. Buildings, roads, complex logistics. Clara had just become another project. She didn't know it yet, but the foundation beneath her had already started to shift. Over the following weeks, Evan gathered everything. The financials, the transfer logs. He met quietly with a real estate lawyer, a friend of a friend, discreet and deeply experienced. The lawyer didn't need long to see what had happened. Fraud, clear as day. They could contest it, yes. They could force a reversal. But Evan had a different idea. What if, he asked the lawyer, I let her believe she won? The man raised an eyebrow. I want to walk away, but not before I pull the last pin. The lawyer didn't understand at first, but in time, he did. Evan began pulling his financial threads from the joint accounts, quietly. He opened a separate account, transferred a small but consistent amount from their shared reserves just under reporting limits each week. He had direct deposit rerouted, changed his login credentials on all systems, waited. When Clara finally noticed, 3 months later, she said nothing. Perhaps she thought he was being petty, or perhaps she didn't see it at all. Too busy, too distracted, too sure of herself. By then, he'd already secured a private apartment in a building he had quietly invested in years ago, a safety net from a time he'd never thought he'd use it. He moved essentials there, started sleeping there more often, due to early site visits. She never questioned it. She seemed almost relieved. The day he returned to the house and found one of her heels broken near the entryway, not from a fall, but discarded like she'd been in a hurry, running towards something. He stood still in the silence of the hallway, listened to nothing, and smiled. He wasn't angry, he was done, and soon, so was she. Evan stopped keeping track of how many times Clara came home late. He no longer asked where she had been. He stopped listening for the lock turning at night, stopped making extra portions at dinner, stopped checking her calendar. Something had shifted between them, an unspoken agreement to stop pretending. She took phone calls in the next room now. She set her phone face down on the counter when he was nearby, and she never left it charging where it could be seen. She began dressing differently, not overtly, not scandalously, but sharper. He noticed the difference in her shoes, in the cut of her coats, in the perfume that had changed twice in as many months. It was as if she had swapped the version of herself that had once been his partner for someone new entirely, someone curated, professional, evasive. She had started doing yoga on Wednesday mornings, claiming it helped with stress. But there were no yoga mats in the car, no gym bag in the entryway, and when Evan looked up the name of the studio she said she attended, he found that it had permanently closed over a year ago. That was the moment he stopped wondering if there was another person. From then on, he knew. He approached things the way he always had, with structure, with process, with quiet detachment. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a collapsing bridge. You didn't scream at the fracture in the support beams. You measured it. You watched. You planned how to bring it down safely. He began making duplicates, bank statements, email threads. He subscribed to a quiet service that would monitor and log text messages through a secondary account linked to their shared phone plan. He read them all with the clarity of someone examining blueprints for failure. There was a name that appeared again and again: Tristan. It appeared casually at first. A quick meeting with Tristan ran late, or Tristan's car broke down again. But soon, it was woven into the mundane. Dinner was perfect. Thanks for last night. Can't wait for this weekend. The messages were intimate, not overtly sexual, but loaded with a familiarity Evan had not received from her in years. Tristan, it turned out, was not a work contact. He was not even a stranger to Evan. Tristan Langley was a city council liaison. Evan had met twice at fundraisers, a man with a perfect smile and a resume full of soft titles. He wore sharp suits and spoke in rehearsed warmth. Evan had watched him work a room once. Clara had laughed at one of his jokes and placed a hand lightly on his arm. At the time, Evan hadn't thought twice about it. Now, he read their messages and learned that Tristan had a dog named Marley, that he brought Clara flowers on Wednesdays, that he had helped her navigate the house stuff, which chilled Evan more than anything else. They had talked openly about the title transfer, about how easy it had been, about how she'd do whatever it took to start her next chapter. She had written, "He won't even notice until I'm gone. He never really looks." Evan read that line 3 times. Then he closed the laptop. The betrayal didn't come in one grand wave. It came in hundreds of small, lapping moments that eroded the memory of who Clara had once been. The woman he had once built dreams with was gone, and in her place was someone who had already moved on. And she had done it from inside the walls of the home they had built together, still sharing dinners in silence, still asking if he needed anything from the store. She had done it slowly, carefully, believing he would never see the cracks, and he hadn't, until now. There were nights Evan didn't sleep. He would sit on the edge of the bed in his apartment, staring into the quiet dark, the sounds of the city humming below. He thought about his father, a man who had walked out on their family when Evan was 9 and had never looked back. He remembered the way his mother had folded into herself afterward, the way she had packed lunches every day with a forced smile. He had promised himself he would never become that man. He would never leave someone broken behind, but he hadn't expected to become the one who was broken. Still, he didn't let the weight of it pull him down. He poured it into his work, into the plan, into the strategy of what came next. He began pulling his professional contacts into quiet action. One of his old colleagues now specialized in real estate consulting. Evan reached out under the pretense of investment inquiries. Over drinks, he mentioned needing an appraisal on a personal property, fast and under the radar. The man agreed. Another friend, a software analyst, helped him comb through financial trails. Clara had opened a separate account, predictable. She had also used his name for a line of credit, assuming it seemed that Evan never checked the finer points of their shared financial identity. That would prove useful later. The lawyer he had consulted helped him begin the long process of undoing what she had done. Fraud was hard to prove, but forgery left traces. They compiled everything: emails, date stamps, signature comparisons, statements. It took time, months. During that time, Clara became bolder. She began spending nights away, offering flimsy excuses about networking events and professional retreats. She began redecorating the house, new drapes, a different rug in the front room, changes that Evan suspected were not really for her at all. They were for Tristan. He was being replaced piece by piece long before she intended to tell him. He was living in a house where he was no longer a factor. Then came the charity gala. Clara had once loved going with Evan. They would dress up, pose for photos, exchange smiles in the glow of soft chandeliers. This time, she told him she'd be attending alone. It's mostly board members this year, nothing fun, but Evan received an invitation anyway. He RSVP'd quietly, rented a tux, arrived unannounced. He saw them before they saw him. Tristan, one hand on her lower back, guiding her toward the bar. Clara in a deep green dress, laughing. Not her polite laugh, but the full, familiar one Evan hadn't heard in years. She looked 10 years younger, rehearsed, radiant. He didn't approach them. He simply watched. It was enough. After that night, the last part of the plan unfolded quickly. The lawyer filed preliminary action to contest the title transfer, citing forgery. It was filed without her knowledge. Simultaneously, Evan's financial audit uncovered unauthorized use of his credit, another legal pressure point. He set in motion the quiet disentanglement of every shared asset, except the house. That, he wanted her to keep believing, was hers. He moved the rest of his belongings into the apartment, left a polite note on the kitchen table. No confrontation, no grand goodbye, just absence. When Clara returned home that weekend, from what Evan assumed was a short trip with Tristan, she found the house spotless. No sign of him, no trace, not even the ring. She didn't call, she didn't email. She texted once. "I guess this is it." Evan didn't reply. In the weeks that followed, the legal gears turned slowly but deliberately. Clara was served with notice of the forgery dispute. She responded with indignation, of course. Claimed misunderstanding, claimed Evan had verbally agreed, claimed she had done it for efficiency. But the documents didn't lie. The signature was a scan from an old rental agreement. The date was during a week Evan had been on a work trip, verifiable by flight logs. Her explanations unraveled. She tried to reach out after that. Left a voicemail, emotional and halting, said they could fix this, said it didn't have to be war. Evan didn't respond. He wasn't angry. He had simply accepted who she had become, someone who had already erased him before he knew it was happening. Her affair was only part of it. The deeper betrayal had been the rewriting of their life, as if he had never mattered. He still drove by the house sometimes, not often, just enough to know it hadn't sold yet. The for sale sign had gone up abruptly after the court process began. She had tried to dump the asset before the full investigation took root, but buyers were scarce once the title was legally frozen. One afternoon, Evan parked across the street. He watched as Clara exited the house, talking rapidly into her phone, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was tired, drawn, nothing like the woman he had seen laughing beside Tristan. She didn't look at the house as she locked it. She just walked away, head down. Evan sat still behind the wheel. Then he drove away, not toward the past, not toward rage, but forward, into the space where his life had once been shared and would now be entirely his own. The process of reclaiming the house was not immediate. Nothing about it was swift or simple. But Evan didn't need speed. He needed certainty. His attorney, a quiet, focused man named Rollins, handled most of the filings. There were delays, motions filed by Clara's side to dismiss, arguments about misunderstanding, claims that Evan had been uninvolved in the property for years, that she had merely done what was practical. But Rollins countered every motion with measured precision. The signature comparison alone was damning. The notary listed on the transfer had never worked with Evan. Her statement, under oath, confirmed she had only dealt with Clara. The paper trail was undeniable. She had removed him from his own house without his knowledge or consent. It was fraud. Elegant, quiet fraud, but fraud nonetheless. While the case unfolded behind the scenes, Evan made no public moves. He didn't speak about it at work. He didn't tell friends. He didn't seek sympathy. He simply lived. He went to job sites, walked properties, reviewed permits. He read more, slept more, took to running early in the mornings through the quiet streets near his apartment. Sometimes he passed families walking their dogs or couples sipping coffee on their balconies. Other times he passed empty storefronts, construction zones, a world constantly being torn down and rebuilt. He liked the rhythm of that, the steady disassembly of something old to make room for something better. It made sense. Clara, on the other hand, was not handling things as gracefully. She had underestimated how much evidence Evan had accumulated. She underestimated how quietly and thoroughly he had planned. She underestimated how little she truly knew about the man she had tried to erase. The first time they crossed paths after his departure was accidental, a fundraising event hosted by a mutual acquaintance. Evan hadn't planned to attend, but a last-minute invitation from a former colleague drew him there. Clara was already inside when he arrived. She noticed him the moment he entered the room. Her expression flickered, not panic, not shame, but something more complex. Disbelief, perhaps, that he had shown up, that he was standing straight, dressed sharply, speaking easily with others, that he looked fine. She approached him during a quiet moment by the drink table. Her voice was soft, brittle around the edges. "I didn't expect you here. I didn't expect you to forge my name on a property title," he said, without looking at her. She blinked, taken aback. "Evan?" He finally looked at her, calm, clear-eyed. "You should enjoy the evening. People are watching." And they were. Clara was a known figure in that circle. So was Evan. The story of their separation hadn't leaked, yet. But rumors moved fast. Whispers about the house, about the filings, about the man who had quietly walked away and then let the walls close in behind him. She didn't try to speak to him again that night. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to make calls. She reached out to mutual friends, testing the waters, framing her version of events, that Evan had checked out long before anything happened, that she had managed everything for years, that the house situation was a mix-up. Most people listened politely, some nodded. A few reached out to Evan directly, asking if he was okay. He always answered the same way, "I'm doing fine. I hope she is too." Nothing more. The court date was set for early spring, a quiet hearing, not open to the public. The judge reviewed the documents for over an hour before speaking. Clara's lawyer made arguments about intention, about the nature of marital property, about practicality. Rollins responded with calm facts: the forged signature, the notary statement, the financial inconsistencies. Evan sat still through it all, watching, listening, saying nothing. When the ruling came, it was simple. The transfer was void. Evan Rourke's name was to be restored to the title, retroactive to the date of the fraudulent document. Clara would face a civil penalty, not criminal, though the judge made it clear that such a path was possible had Evan pursued it. She was fined. She was warned. She was removed from sole ownership. The property was now a contested asset, subject to further division, but Evan had the leverage now. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He left the courtroom with Rollins, shook the man's hand, and returned to work that afternoon like it was any other day. Clara, it turned out, did not take the ruling quietly. Within a week, she attempted to relist the house, a move blocked by Evan's newly filed injunction. Her lawyer, now less confident, began pushing for a settlement. That was when Evan made his final move. He offered to buy out her share, at market value, clean and efficient. She'd walk away with enough to find a new place. No mess, no headlines, no further consequences. But she would give up all claim, permanently. She tried to negotiate. Evan didn't budge. "You removed me from that house like I was nothing," he said over the phone. "Now it's your turn to leave." She signed the documents 3 days later. The house felt different when Evan walked back through its front door for the first time in over 6 months. It was quiet, stripped of life, most of the furniture gone. A few of Clara's boxes remained in the foyer, forgotten or simply left behind. He didn't touch them. He walked from room to room, absorbing the echo of a life that had once been full. The walls were the same, but the energy was not. The house had become a shell, not broken, just empty. He spent the next few weeks restoring it. Not to its previous form, but to something new. He repainted, removed the rugs, replaced the fixtures, not out of bitterness, but because he wanted no remnants, no trace of what had happened. He brought in new furniture, rehung the art, planted a small garden out back, something he had never done while married, but found himself drawn to now. Quiet, slow work. Healing work. One morning, while clearing the attic, he found an old photo album, their honeymoon, tucked between pages of tax forms and old leases. He sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, flipping through the photos. Clara laughing in a white sundress, the sun catching her hair. Evan younger, squinting at the camera, smiling without thinking. He studied the image for a long time, not with regret, not with sorrow, just acceptance. They had been real once, and then they weren't. He closed the album, slid it into a box, and labeled it simply, Old Life. By summer, the house no longer resembled its former self. It was lighter, more open, filled with small touches that belonged solely to him. He didn't host dinner parties. He didn't bring anyone home. But it was his again, fully, unapologetically. The neighborhood had adjusted as well. The whispers faded. People waved when he jogged past in the mornings. The couple 2 doors down invited him to their 4th of July barbecue. He brought a pie. It felt like something new. He heard that Clara had moved downtown, a high-rise reportedly. Tristan was seen with her once or twice, but then not again. Evan didn't care to know the details. She had chosen her path, so had he. One evening in late August, Evan stood on the porch of his house, the one he had reclaimed with quiet precision. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the rooftops. A breeze moved through the trees, soft and warm. He sipped from a glass of iced tea, watching the world without urgency. Inside, the house was quiet, peaceful. He had not taken revenge. He had taken his name back, his home, his dignity. Brick by brick, like a man repairing a cracked foundation. No explosions, no theatrics, just strength, patience, and resolve. She had taken his name off the house. He had taken the house off her list of options. The days settled into a rhythm that felt foreign at first. Evan was a creature of habit, but those habits had always included Clara. Her voice in the mornings, her perfume on the stairwell, her half-read books on the kitchen counter. Now, the house was filled with his own silence, a new kind of quiet that took getting used to. He no longer came home wondering if she'd be there, no longer scanned the driveway for her car, no longer kept an ear out for her key in the lock. There was peace in that. Not relief, not quite, just a soft, steady neutrality that allowed him to breathe deeper than he had in years. He had cleared every last box she'd left behind. Some he donated, some he tossed. A few personal ones, the ones that still bore traces of their old life, photos, letters, the occasional ticket stub, he packed into a plastic container and left at a storage facility he no longer visited. He didn't need them. He didn't want to destroy them either. It was enough that they were elsewhere, that they no longer shared his space. His job remained unchanged, though the way people looked at him had shifted slightly. At the firm, there was a kind of silent respect that hadn't been there before. They didn't ask what had happened, not directly, but Evan knew they knew. The quiet lunchroom conversations that stopped when he walked in, the subtle glances, the change in how they addressed him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't gossip. It was something closer to acknowledgement, that he had gone through something, that he had survived it intact. It was Rollins who delivered the final documents that month, a thick envelope with the court seal confirming the transfer of sole ownership. Evan opened it at the breakfast table, scanning each page slowly, deliberately. His name, his house, no caveats, no conditions, final. He set the pages down beside his coffee and stared out the window, the morning light catching in the leaves of the tree Clara once wanted cut down. He didn't smile, but he exhaled, deep and full. Clara sent one final message not long after, a short email. Subject line, "I hope you're doing okay." The body contained just 2 lines. "I know I made mistakes. I hope you find peace. C." Evan didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. That fall he made more changes, not dramatic ones. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself. He simply let the house evolve. He tore out the ivy Clara had planted along the side fence. It had never taken well to the soil anyway. He replaced the guest bedroom furniture with a simple writing desk and shelves. He didn't write, not yet, but the idea of a quiet room with no purpose except thought appealed to him. On weekends, he walked to the nearby farmer's market. He'd never done that before. Clara had always ordered groceries online. It was strange, the number of small decisions that had been hers by default. What brand of coffee they bought, which light bulbs to stock, how towels were folded. He relearned these things in solitude, and with every small choice, he reclaimed a piece of himself he hadn't realized he'd surrendered. Occasionally, he would see her name in an email thread or tagged in a local fundraiser post. She hadn't disappeared. She was still active, still charming the social circuits, still attending the same events with polished grace. But she no longer lived in his world. Their overlap had ended the moment she believed she could edit him out of the title and keep the structure intact. That's not how architecture worked. Pull out the wrong beam, and the entire frame groans under the shift. The holidays came. Evan declined invitations that didn't feel right and accepted a few that did. He had dinner with a colleague's family. Quiet, full of laughter not aimed at performance. He brought a bottle of wine and helped clear the table. No one asked about Clara. He was grateful for that. In January, a storm rolled through the city. Heavy snow, the kind that coated everything and slowed the world to a hush. Evan stood at the front window for a long time, watching the flakes drift sideways across the yard. He didn't feel lonely. That had surprised him the most. Not that Clara was gone, but that her absence didn't ache anymore. The emptiness wasn't hollow. It was spacious. He had room again, for thought, for quiet, for stillness. He went up to the attic later that night and opened the box marked Old Life. He sifted through the contents slowly, not with nostalgia, but with curiosity. The photos still held warmth. The ticket stubs from a concert she had dragged him to still carried the faint imprint of joy. There had been good years, he didn't deny them, but those moments were no longer his to hold. He returned everything to the box, taped it shut, and carried it to the curb the next morning. The truck took it away without ceremony. He never checked to see if Clara had remarried. He didn't look for her on social media. He didn't search her name in the news. It wasn't avoidance. It was intentional disinterest. She was a chapter closed. The house was his again. And more than the walls and windows, it was the stillness inside that he had reclaimed. Evan spent more time on the porch as spring approached. The evenings grew longer, the air lighter. He started planting things in the garden, not with any great ambition, but enough to watch things grow. Peppers, tomatoes, a few herbs. He liked the way the dirt felt under his nails, the quiet ritual of watering, the waiting. One afternoon, while trimming the hedges along the sidewalk, a woman passed by with her dog. She paused, smiled, commented on the flowers. Her name was Karen. She lived 2 blocks over. They chatted briefly, just about the weather, the neighborhood, the dog's name, nothing more. But when she waved goodbye and walked on, Evan realized it was the first time in over a year that he'd spoken to someone in front of the house without Clara's shadow hovering somewhere behind the door. He felt no urge to chase that conversation, no urgency to turn it into something, but he noticed how light his chest felt afterward. He continued with the hedges, lost in the rhythm of it. Later, inside, he prepared dinner with music playing in the background. His music, not hers. Jazz. A little messy, a little improvised. The kitchen still echoed sometimes, but it no longer sounded empty. It sounded like possibility. The court documents were tucked into a file in the study, along with the title, deed, the financial settlements, the letters of release. They were filed alphabetically, neatly, and untouched for weeks now. Evan didn't need to revisit them. He had won. Not by breaking her down, but by refusing to be broken, by holding his center while she unraveled theirs. The thought came to him one night as he stood brushing his teeth, gazing at the mirror. He hadn't looked closely at himself in a long time, not critically. He saw lines he hadn't noticed before, gray at the temples, eyes less tired than they had been months ago, a man who had walked through a storm without raising his voice. He'd lost his marriage, lost his name from his own house. And yet, here he stood, more himself than he had ever been. He turned out the light, walked down the hall, and settled into bed alone. Not lonely, just alone. A clean, clear space in a house that no longer whispered of what had been taken from him, only of what he had quietly, patiently taken back. In the early days of April, the house began to hum again, not with activity, but with presence. It breathed. Evan noticed it when he opened the windows and the breeze carried through the hallways without catching on ghosts. The hardwood floors no longer creaked with memory. They simply echoed his own steps. He'd taken to cooking more, sometimes slow roasts or stews that filled the space with warmth. Not because he had guests, but because he liked the rhythm, chopping, stirring, seasoning. It gave the evening shape. It was the kind of domestic routine that had once been shared, now reclaimed entirely for himself. He didn't talk about Clara anymore, even to himself. There was no need. The story was finished, even if the epilogue stretched long. Her voice no longer surfaced when he reached for a decision. He no longer questioned whether she'd have chosen the navy towels or the cream ones. His choices were his own again, fully. There was freedom in that, not wild or exuberant, but steady, solid, like a foundation beneath new framing. One day while cleaning out the garage, he found a frame print Clara had once insisted on hanging in the foyer. A minimalist sketch of a tree, leafless and stark, with a quote about resilience in cursive below it. He'd always found it trite. Back then, he'd hung it because it mattered to her. Now, he looked at it for a long time before setting it aside for donation. Resilience wasn't about surviving winter. It was about choosing to replant in spring. His routine kept him grounded. Weekdays at the firm, weekends in the garden. He had started volunteering his expertise at a small architectural program for underserved youth. Once a week, he'd sit in a room full of teenagers with questions about structural loads and design constraints, and he'd walk them through drawings, blueprints, possibilities. They listened, some more than others, but the work mattered. It reminded him that skill could build more than just buildings. It could build futures. There were still moments, rare now, where the past crept in unexpectedly. A song in a grocery store that they'd danced to in their second year. A dish at a restaurant she once ordered religiously. a street corner where they had kissed under a November sky. But those moments no longer stung. They surfaced like echoes, soft and distant, and then passed. One evening, after an unusually long day on site, Evan returned home to find a letter waiting. Not an email, not a text. An actual letter, handwritten, sealed. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It had once filled the margins of birthday cards and post-it notes on the fridge. He sat down on the porch with a glass of water and opened it slowly. "Evan," it began, "I know I shouldn't write. I know I don't have the right, but I've been carrying this and I needed to set it down, even if you never read it." The letter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an apology dressed in excuses. It was honest in its way. She wrote about how she had convinced herself she was doing what was necessary, that she'd told herself stories about their distance, about his silences, about her own restlessness, that Tristan had felt like a doorway, not because she loved him, but because he offered an escape, a mirror, that she'd been wrong, not just about Evan, but about herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only said she hoped he had found peace. Evan read it once, then again. He folded it carefully and slid it into the back of a drawer he rarely used. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel pity. He felt the kind of closure that comes not from resolution, but from finality. She had her voice again. She had used it, and now he could move on without the weight of her silence. That week, he accepted an invitation to a dinner hosted by one of his colleagues. A small group, 4 couples, a few singles. Casual, comfortable. He sat beside a woman named Layla, a friend of the host, who worked in environmental law. They spoke about zoning issues, policy shifts, the irony of city planning. She laughed it easily, had sharp eyes and calloused fingertips from weekend hikes. There was no spark, not yet, but there was something else. Ease. A conversation that didn't carry weight. When she asked about his house, he told her the story, abbreviated, careful, and she listened without flinching. She didn't offer sympathy, just nodded, then asked about his tomatoes. They walked out to their cars together that night, breath fogging in the early spring chill. She thanked him for the conversation, touched his arm lightly, and said she hoped to see him again. He didn't rush to call her. He didn't build a future in his head. But when her number appeared in his inbox a week later, he smiled. The house was ready now, not for someone new to fill a void, but to exist fully as a space of his own. He hung a new set of prints in the hallway. Blueprints from old projects, framed in sleek black, clean lines. He found beauty in them, not because they represented work, but because they represented precision, intention, choices that held weight. He wrote back to Layla once, casually, suggested a coffee near the market. She agreed. It was simple, no expectations, no pretense, just 2 people choosing to share an hour. As spring deepened, Evan spent more time on his back deck. The garden was coming in slowly, mint, basil, tomatoes sprouting. He drank tea instead of coffee now. Something about the quiet ritual of it soothed him. He had begun sketching again, not for work, just for himself. Imaginary houses, bridges, arches, not for permits, not for clients. Just shapes he liked, ideas that lived only in pencil. One afternoon, while sketching under the sun, his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He let it ring. It buzzed again. A voicemail. He waited until evening to play it. "Hey, Evan, it's Clara. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I just wanted to thank you for how you handled everything, for not dragging it into the dirt. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to build something, not just homes, but relationships. I didn't understand that before. I'm starting to, now. Anyway, I hope you're well." He deleted the message, not out of spite, just out of need. She had said her piece. He had already let her go. There was no value in holding echoes. In May, the city held its annual architecture expo. Evan was asked to speak on sustainable design. He accepted, stood in front of a room of young engineers, and spoke with clarity, with quiet authority. He told them that building something was not about perfection, but about balance. That a good structure wasn't flawless. It was resilient. Designed to bend without breaking. Designed to be lived in, not just admired. Afterward, one of the students approached him, asked how he had found balance in his own work. Evan paused, then smiled. By remembering that nothing worth keeping is ever built in a rush. That night, he returned to the house, lights low, garden just watered, air cool against his skin. He opened the door, stepped inside, and let the silence greet him like an old friend. No shadows lingered in the corners, no regrets hung in the air. He had not won through vengeance. He had not raised his voice. He had not tried to reclaim love. He had only reclaimed himself, and that was more than enough. In June, Evan finalized the sale of a commercial project that had taken almost 2 years to complete. It was a sleek, LEED-certified complex on the city's East End, a testament to restraint and thoughtful design. The project wrapped ahead of schedule and under budget, rare, almost suspiciously so. His team held a small gathering in a rooftop lounge to mark the milestone. It wasn't extravagant, just quiet toasts, soft music, good conversation. Evan stayed longer than he usually would have. He listened to younger staff talk about ambitions, about new certifications, and future cities they wanted to help shape. He felt no need to speak about himself. His satisfaction came from watching others prepare to build something meaningful, their hands still uncalloused, their voices still certain. On the walk home that night, the city around him shimmered in that early summer glow, that specific kind of light that made glass buildings look warm instead of cold. Evan passed beneath trees he used to ignore when he was married. Clara had always loved this season, always wanted to escape somewhere with vineyards or lakes. They'd gone to Oregon once. She'd talked for hours about starting a wine tasting retreat someday. Evan hadn't seen the appeal then. Now, walking alone through the streets of a city that no longer bore her shape, he found himself wondering if she'd ever gotten close to that dream, if she'd chased it, or if it had died beneath the weight of her choices. He returned home to find a small package on his doorstep. No return address. Inside was a worn paperback copy of a novel they had once read together, annotated in the margins, one of her favorites. He didn't need to read the note tucked inside to know it was from her, but he read it anyway. "Thought you might want this back. I've been holding on to things that don't belong to me." He placed the book on the shelf beside the others, not hidden, not featured, just part of the collection. That same week, Layla sent him a message. She'd be out of town for a few weeks, something to do with a case she was working. Her note was short, but she said she'd enjoyed their conversations and hoped they'd pick them up again when she returned. Evan replied simply, "I'd like that." He didn't mark the calendar. He didn't wait by the phone, but he did find himself thinking of her when he had passed the cafe they'd met at, or when a story about land rights popped up on the radio. Not with urgency, just with curiosity. Mid-July brought a heat wave. The garden struggled, despite Evan's care. He spent early mornings watering the soil before the sun could strip it bare. Some plants thrived, others withered. He found himself unbothered by the inconsistency. Growth, he'd come to learn, wasn't always about perfection. Sometimes it was about resilience. The same philosophy that had seen him through construction projects was now guiding him through life. Strong foundations, flexible design, constant adjustment. He ran into a former neighbor at the hardware store, a man who used to wave from across the street during lawn work. They chatted by the paint samples, nothing deep. But as they parted, the man turned back and said, "The place looks good now. Looks like it fits you better." Evan nodded, didn't ask for elaboration. He understood what the man meant. The house no longer wore Clara's imprint. It no longer looked like a compromise. One night, as a summer storm rolled through the neighborhood, Evan sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the rain batter the roof and windows. The thunder reminded him of nights when Clara would wake in a start, press close to him for comfort, then fall asleep again as if nothing had happened. He'd felt protective back then, essential. That memory flickered now like a match, brief, then gone. He didn't mourn it. He didn't deny it either. That had been real. So had its unraveling. A few days later, Rollins called with an update. The last financial tangle between him and Clara had finally been resolved. An old investment, tied to a property they had once co-owned. It had sold quietly, and his portion had been wired to him directly. "You're free and clear now," Rollins said. "No more signatures, no more filings. It's all done." Evan thanked him, ended the call, and stood in his study for a long time, free and clear. The phrase echoed, not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally. There were no hooks in him anymore, nothing she could pull on. He was his own structure again, unshared, unburdened. He celebrated by buying a new chair, a deep leather reading chair for the corner of the den. He assembled it himself, despite the hassle, then sank into it with a cold drink and no background noise. No music, no TV, just the sound of the ceiling fan and the city breathing outside. The next morning, he received an unexpected message from Layla. "I'm back. Coffee soon?" He replied within minutes, suggested the new bookstore cafe near the university. She agreed. They met that Friday. She wore a denim jacket and black sneakers, hair tied back, eyes bright despite the heat. They spoke for an hour, then two. No awkward silences, no probing questions, just conversation. Clear, thoughtful, easy. At one point she asked about his house again. "It's mine now," he said, without pride, without bitterness, just fact. "Took a while, but it's mine," she smiled. "I like that you say it like that, not like it's a possession, more like it's a place that reflects you." Evan nodded. That was exactly what it was. They left the cafe walking side by side. She didn't ask to come over. He didn't offer. They weren't rushing. She had her own place, her own history, her own structure to maintain. And he respected that. But when she touched his arm before saying goodbye, there was a groundedness in it, a recognition. Back home, Evan walked through each room slowly, not inspecting, not fixing, just moving through space that now belonged only to him. He stopped at the back window and looked out over the garden. The basil had gone wild, curling toward the fence. The peppers were finally fruiting. A few weeds, sure, but they weren't hurting anything. Later that night, he sat in the new chair and opened a book. Not the one Clara had returned. Another one, something new. He read for hours, pausing only to sip water, shift position, look up now and then to hear the wind. There were no disruptions, no unspoken tension, no person waiting in the next room, drawing borders around silence. He realized something then, something he hadn't been able to articulate before. The revenge hadn't been about taking the house back. It hadn't been about legal victories or signatures on a page. It had been about removing the quiet corrosion of being unseen, of living in a place where he had slowly been edited out of his own story. Now, every corner reflected his presence. Every drawer, every lamp, every color on the walls. Even the quiet, especially the quiet, was his. And in that quiet, he had found not just justice, but identity. Not just peace, but clarity. He wasn't sure what the future held. Maybe Layla would become part of it. Maybe not. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had built something, not just from stone or wood, but from self-respect, from endurance, from restraint. And as the house settled around him, floorboards creaking gently like old friends stretching in the dark, Evan closed his book, turned out the light, and let the night fold over him like a blueprint finally complete. The weeks that followed slipped into rhythm, not out of monotony, but out of peace. Evan no longer measured his days by conflict or fallout, but by the simple things that had once escaped him. The morning light in the hallway, the sound of the garden gate closing gently in the wind, the way a breeze moved through the house with no resistance, no weight of past conversations lingering in the corners. It was a life reassembled slowly, not from scratch, but from the pieces he had chosen to keep. Layla and he met again and then again. Their connection grew without urgency, without performance. She wasn't a mirror to his pain or a bandage for old wounds. She was simply present, a person with her own past, her own careful joy, her own quiet edge. They didn't define what they were becoming. That was the point. He didn't need definitions anymore. He didn't need to shape something too early out of fear of silence. He let it breathe. One Sunday morning, as they sat on the porch drinking tea, Layla pointed at a faded line on the edge of the porch rail. "Old paint job?" she asked. Evan nodded. "Clara picked the color. I never liked it, but I didn't change it until last month." Layla didn't ask for more. She just nodded and said, "It's a good color now." They didn't talk about Clara after that. There was no reason to. He repainted the rail that afternoon, not because it needed it, but because it was his now. Every nail, every flake of wood. It no longer bore someone else's version of beauty. He planted 2 new trees that week too, on either side of the yard, imagining how they'd rise and curve toward the sun over the years. He didn't need the shade now, but someday, someone might. That was enough. Letters from Clara stopped. There were no more voicemails, no emails, no returned books. She had disappeared from his world as thoroughly as he had from hers. Mutual vanishing, a sort of respect, perhaps. Or just the result of 2 people who had finally accepted the wreckage. She existed now, Only in the small ways time records what came before, in fading imprints on the wall, in gaps on the bookshelf where her titles used to sit, in the memories that softened over time until they lost their edge. By the time August came, Evan had started a side project, designing a series of tiny homes for transitional housing. It was pro bono, but the team he assembled treated it like any paid job. They met in the evenings, laid out blueprints, sourced materials, filed permits. It gave his hands purpose again. It gave his mind something to shape that wasn't loss. The first structure went up by early October, nestled in a small wooded lot repurposed by the city. Evan didn't speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching someone else describe the project's purpose. He was fine with that. He didn't need credit. He just needed the thing to stand. That night, Layla brought over takeout and a bottle of wine. They ate in the kitchen, laughed about nothing, sat on the floor afterward, and listened to records on his old stereo. At one point, she leaned her head against his shoulder, and Evan felt, not adrenaline, not the shaky thrill of early infatuation, but something warmer, steadier, like foundation underfoot. He didn't tell her about the moment Clara had erased his name from the deed. He didn't tell her how close he had come to walking away from it all, the house, the career, the city. He didn't need to. Those were not secrets he carried anymore. They were just stories, and he didn't owe them to anyone, not unless he chose to share them. And even then, they didn't define him. He remembered a line Clara had once underlined in a book. Sometimes the house you build alone is the one that finally fits. At the time, she had laughed at it, called it sentimental. He hadn't understood it either. But now, sitting beside someone who didn't need to be told every page of his past, surrounded by walls he had chosen, in a life no longer borrowed, he understood. It wasn't about isolation. It wasn't even about self-reliance. It was about ownership. Not of things, but of space, of peace, of voice. The house had no ghosts now, no residue. Even the dreams had changed. They were no longer looping reels of courtroom scenes and hidden messages and slammed doors. They were simple. Trees, rivers, light through windows. That was what healing looked like, he supposed. Not an arrival, but an absence of friction. Not forgetting, but quiet acceptance. He didn't think often about the day he discovered the forged title transfer, but when he did, it no longer came with rage. Just a nod to the beginning of something. It had taken everything to stay calm, to act without malice, to navigate betrayal without becoming vengeful. And in the end, that was the triumph. Not that he got the house back, not that she paid a price, but that he hadn't broken. He never said her name again out loud. By the time the first frost appeared on the windows, Evan had settled into the final form of the life he hadn't known he was building. It was quiet, uncomplicated, honest. There were no dramatic chapters left to write, just the slow continuation of a man living well, living on his own terms, in a house that now bore no signatures but his own. What did you think of this story and how he handled everything? Would you have made the same choice, or walked a different path? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe.